Okay, for this drawing, we're working with sighting for angles and a little bit of proportion. I'm drawing a small picture, and the first thing that I did was just use an HB pencil to do a really light gesture, and then as I progressed in the drawing, I darkened the line. But first, the sighting needs to take place. So as I gesture, it's an extended gesture, so I'm really looking at what I am, drawing here, and I'm not just thinking, well, there's an opening ellipse, so draw an opening ellipse. I'm really looking at what I'm drawing. So as I do, I'm asking myself a bunch of questions. How tall does it feel when I look at it compared to its width? What do the angles look like as I draw it? And as I come down contour lines on the end, whereabout does the handle pop out from top and bottom? And what does the negative space look like? And same thing with the spout. What does this angle look like? And as it comes in here, and what does this look like? And how open is the bottom? That's a strong consideration, and it should kind of mimic this one. From there, as I'm gesture drawing, I'm using a sighting method for angles after I get the proportion down to get my overall height and my width, which I've boxed in. After that, I want to really focus on angles. The cup pitcher has a lot of angles to it. As you can see, there's an angle that goes through here, and there's angles on the side, and there's angles in the handle, and angles here, but there's also something called reference points or landmarks. So what that is are points that stick out, like here and here, and you can draw an angle from there to there using the sighting method and the clock method to find what that looks like. So as I see it with my arm extended fully and one eye closed, I lock it onto the end of here, and I ask myself, about what time is that? And for me, it's just before noon. So I know that it's slightly out further than here. So I'm doing that all the way around, looking for my angles. When I'm sighting my cup, I'm asking myself, what does that angle look like? Is it 1 o'clock? Is it 12 o'clock? Is it 11 o'clock? Is it 11:30? And then I mimic that. One thing that you can do is draw a clock right on your page so that can help you kind of make the comparison by looking at it here. There's reference points all over that you can use to find these angles. Going through here, from this point to this point, where this comes out to here, when you do an angle like that, if you have the body drawn in proportion, you can do an angle from here to see how far the handle comes out at that point. And the same thing here, going through that end and through the top. And when you do that, it's called triangulation, and the handle needs to fit within that. At the same time, looking at negative space here, here, and here. And then I do the same when I do it over here, and I have this angle, which is a sighted angle, which came out to be about maybe 1 o'clock. What does that negative space look like? So I got my gardener outside. So just angles all over the place. That's a good, quick way to see where things relate to each other. Another thing that you can do is plumb lines, which are horizontal and vertical lines. Let's see this one right here. And those also help you see how things relate to each other in space. So if I do a plumb line here, or even here where the cup or the pitcher comes out, and I go straight up, how far out does this come from that plumb line from the straight vertical. I can do the same thing here from this end and going up to see where the cup lands there. When I'm doing my plumb lines, all I'm doing is sighting, and I have like a straight up and down. You don't want to tilt, you want to keep it straight up and down and act like a clock if you're doing angles, but either vertical or horizontal for plumb lines. And you can see if I line it up here, I can see kind of what this space in here looks like and about where that point is and that point is. And I could go to the outside of the handle here, and I can see what that negative shape looks like and how that angle looks like in comparison to the vertical. Same thing here. If I have a plumb line here and I sight that on my object, I can compare what the angle looks like to my straight up and down line. Same thing horizontal. I can do this and I can see from end to end of this lower ellipse how far down this comes. What does that look like? Same thing up here. When I roughly draw in an ellipse, what does that look like? In proportion, all of these smaller shapes are measurable, but that's another video. So angles everywhere. Look for your angles and sight them. Easiest thing to do is use the clock method to see what time it is. Keep your arms straight and imagine you have a pane of glass between you and your subject matter, so you don't want to tilt it and break the glass. Keep it straight up and down, go side to side, look through one eye, lock the angle, then bring it over. Or use the clock method and tell yourself it's about 11:30. What does 11:30 look like on your clock? And then bring that down. My clock doesn't look like a clock, but you know, I would do it much more obviously correctly. Last thing, when you have a drawing that you're working up in pencil, graphite, you can finish it off. You can, you know, use more value, thick and thin line, things like that. And if you don't want your drawing to be confused with all of these other lines, you can use a blue pencil or any other color that is erasable. You want to make sure it's erasable. So these can be erased, but it helps you see the actual construction lines and not just, you know, the drawing with a whole bunch of graphite lines and then you can't even see your drawing anymore. So a blue pencil, that's one thing I've always used when I'm using my construction lines to build up my object. Something like this, getting used to it, it takes time, it takes a lot of practice. So go into it with curiosity. You're gonna learn a lot, and just practice it as much as possible with anything, chairs, cups, anything that has angles to it, to get used to sighting that way. And before you know it, your drawings will look more and more accurate, and you'll have more fun with it too, and won't struggle as much with your gesture drawings. I use axis lines. Last note, axis lines through the middle. I have a symmetrical object here that on either side needs to be a mirror image. I start with the body of it, and then I know that each side is the same, not necessarily because of my angles, which do help a lot, and proportion. And I drew from the bottom up, and I was a little bit off on the top. But one way to make sure it's symmetrical is when you have one side that feels correct, and usually if you're right-handed, your right side will usually be the more correct side than the other, and vice versa. If you look at one side and you look at your object and it looks pretty good, go with it and get your center axis line down. And then one thing that you can do is, starting from the center axis with your pencil lead, go out to like your widest part, lock it with your finger, and then bring it over and mark it. Do that in a few spots, especially if you have something that tapers, and mark it. And then maybe up here, same thing, and the ellipse. And mark it. That way, and then you just draw through your marks. That way you know the measurements on either side of your center axis are the same going from top to bottom. When you're dealing with the ellipses can feel kind of tough, but they don't have to be. If you have a center axis line vertically, and you've drawn in, you know, just loosely, your ellipse, find your center, where you think your center is on the ends, and draw a horizontal line, make sure they're perpendicular, and then same thing, if usually our front feels more accurate than the back because we may tend to go too high or too low, go from here to here, take a measurement, as close as you can get, and do the same thing, and mark it. And so you have your X and your Y axis lines, and you have your ends, like start at the end, and then carry through here. And that takes practice, and there's other methods of drawing ellipses, but that's the quick and easy way. But side to side measuring can be very helpful when you have a symmetrical item. That's part of the measuring process. And I think that's it. So good luck, have fun with it, and you might feel a little rough at first, but just keep practicing.